Okay, all right, so welcome everybody. We've taken a couple of minutes before starting the recording just to introduce ourselves and see what the burning topics are in people's minds. So my name is Stephanie Sewell. I'm an alternative education coach and teen mentor, and I host this cafe every 2 weeks on behalf of Unschooling School. I'm going to apologize for the quality of the video. I left my camera at home, so it's just my laptop video, which is really not very good, so sorry about that. And I do want to make sure that I note a few times today that our next cafe will actually be in 3 weeks' time rather than in 2 weeks' time. So we'll have 2 cafes in a row. So the next one will be on March 7th. And I'm also making a resolution to remember to share important information with you, which I just put into the chat. It's possible to sign up for a newsletter, which will give you the details of the next cafes, including the topics. I try to crowdsource the topics as much as possible from the participants. So if you have an idea, please put it into that Google form. And if you have any questions, comments, or need to get in touch, that's my email address there. All right, housekeeping done. So I decided to talk about trust today on Valentine's Day because I think that trust and love are so closely connected that maybe they're even the same thing. I don't know, I haven't thought about that. It just occurred to me now. And a good part of what inspired this topic for me today was a story similar to one that Sydney just recounted to us. The mom of a teen that I now mentor, when I first met this family, the teen was needing to leave school because of a lot of anxiety and trauma, like a really, really, really tough situation that had been going on for a long time. It was an incredibly emotional, and it's just a situation of crisis in the family. And the thing that stuck out for me was in that first conversation, the mom repeated, it must have been 5 or 6 times, I trust my daughter. I trust that this is going to work. And it blew me away because it was so clear in the midst of so much crisis. And I thought, wow, like what a testament to the power of love and trust in the midst of all of that. And when you have that almost like a mantra that you can hold in your head, it can be the one thing that keeps you sane and that keeps you moving forward. Because no matter how crazy everything seems and how wild an idea it might seem to actually leave school, if you're following that sense of, I trust that this is going to be right because I can see that my child is not able to be there, so let's see what's happening. Let's trust. Trust in the unfolding somehow of what we're creating space for here. So that's why I brought this topic up today. So in thinking about what to talk about, I realized that I think it's a lot easier, more common, and more common, I think, for us to be saying the phrase, I don't trust, than to be saying the phrase, I trust. Like when I was thinking about it, there were so many things I could think of that started with, I don't trust. And I realized maybe that's why it's such a radical concept to trust, because we're so much in the habit of not trusting. And I don't necessarily mean like, I don't trust you because you've shown me that blah, 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 like that kind of really negative place. But the don't trust around, I have to make sure that everything's going to be okay. Because I don't trust that it will be okay if I don't make sure that it will be okay. It's that parental dance of control, love, making sure they're good, doing the right thing, all of that. And I think maybe without us ever really naming it, there's an awful lot of I don't trust. So I wanted to throw that out there. Again, as I said, I don't necessarily have a ton of answers that I want to share to the questions I pose, but I have some thoughts and I'm really eager to get to a point of being able to discuss them together as well. So there's something to think about, is how much more comfortable and common does I don't trust feel than I trust feels. And I was thinking about how in our way of being with kids, in our world of parenting and teaching and school and so on, there's a lot of examples of I don't trust. There's, even when a baby is really tiny, we're often suggesting that it's not a bad thing to have a bottle rather than the breast every now and then. because that way you can see how much they're drinking. And there's obviously lots of other reasons around that, and I'm not speaking from any medical expertise, but that popped into my head as a time when I've heard that phrase of I don't trust. I need to see that amount. Whereas we could also think, well, this is just something that the child will show us if it's not working out in other ways, and we can trust them. So that particular example brought me to the idea of trusting our instinct, and how I think in so many ways as parents, we do trust our instinct. And something to really, again, something just to think about might be, when do I trust my instinct fairly easily? And when don't I? Or when is it hard for me to trust my instinct? And what's getting in the way? And I think some of that, again, comes from external forces, right? We know that we're supposed to send our kids to school when they're 5, because that's just, kindergarten starts then. So we do. It's not about how is this child doing? Do I feel that this child would benefit from that experience or not? It's just like, oh, they're 5? Okay, away we go. Even things like, how are they doing in school? How is their experience? How is their learning? Whatever questions we're asking, we don't come from a place of trusting that that'll just show up and the child will tell us or we'll know, or we need report cards. And so much is based around report cards and marks, and can't just have words, we need marks. And there's a lot of examples, I think, of places where we might be in the habit of trusting our instinct, except that there's this external measure which is imposed, or not even imposed, but is common. And that can potentially then get in the way of our ability to trust our instinct. So I think that's an interesting thing to consider, is when am I trusting? When am I not trusting? And why? And am I happy with it, that balance? Or are there things I want to trust on more? And how might I be able to get there? So then I think there's a question of space that comes into it. When kids are really busy, or when they're constantly having people making sure that they're okay, they don't have space to be themselves and to live and to try things and to try different things. And they don't necessarily have space for their instinct, for their trust in themselves to grow. And in fact, their trust in themselves, which is maybe innate, I don't know, when they're born, that trust in themselves is often actually thwarted as they move through. They want to go and do something, they want to eat something. And with all the best interests, all the best ideas, we're like, no, you can't eat that, you should eat that. Or don't have any more of that. We're not trusting their process, and that's taking away their space for that instinct and that trust in themselves to figure itself out, and for them to be able to trust themselves. And I think that can give rise to these situations of crisis sometimes, when things can get so far, something like school can become so unhealthy that it's gotten to a really, a situation of crisis before any of us involved, parents, teachers, kids, whoever, are able to go, whoa, like something's not right here. And we can trust that. We can trust that feeling that it's just something's not jiving, and we can step into a different. So one of there's an analogy I use sometimes, which I hadn't thought of in these contexts before, but I think it might work. If you imagine a campfire and people sitting around that campfire tending to it. And I think that if we think of our child's life as that campfire, and we're sitting there tending to it, they're sitting there tending to it, other people in their lives are sitting there tending to it. The more we, as the parents, control how that fire is fed and nurtured, the less the child has the chance to do that. And of course, when they're really tiny, we're going to make sure they don't burn themselves. But by the time they're 20, we hope that they're able to, keep that fire going largely by themselves. Still, of course, many people around it, but that they can take responsibility for being the firekeeper. So I think that's an interesting way of thinking, okay, so here's this fire, this campfire, which is my kid's life. If you have a moment of, I don't know what to do in this situation, do I trust them? They're trusting me? Like, do I know what to do? Sometimes that just putting it a little bit outside of you, them, and realizing it's a thing that we're all nurturing together. Sometimes that can give you the space to see how to engage in the situation. So it might be something like, well, if you're unschooling and things have been going really well and you're thinking about how that fire looks now, that, sometimes you put logs which are ideas on it, or you find some really cool person that they can engage with, and then they might put a log on it that's a friend that they met, or a need to hang out at home for a couple of days rather than going and doing the things they normally do. So if you can kind of see that dynamic of feeding the fire is going well, and then you're getting into this like new stage. It's like somebody came along and said, oh, the fire is different now, they're high school age. Then maybe we can say, okay, that's okay, there's a new context. But how have we been doing it? How have I been trusting them and giving them that space to figure out how to nurture that fire? And how have they been starting to take more responsibility as firekeeper? How can we continue on that with that way of being, even though we're in this kind of new environment or this new dynamic with our older kids? So I offer you that analogy as something to think about. And then the other thing I had a note about that with, I know this has happened for me with my teens, that there have been times, to use the fire analogy, that it's like they turn up at the fire with a can of gas, and I think they're about to throw a can of gas on, and I go to stop them. But actually, it didn't wind up being so bad. So that's part of that trust piece, or the space piece, of remembering that you might see something coming up to that fire in their arms as a can of gas, but even just taking that breath and getting curious about what their motivation is for bringing that to their life, who might be a completely different answer. And I think we get better at doing that when we recognize the ways that we do trust them. So if you know that you generally can trust your kids, you have that relationship of trust, they're thriving, whatever, and then suddenly something comes up and you're like, that's crazy. But everything else, you're used to that way of trusting. Then that might give you the permission and the space to say, hang on, let's talk about that. I'm curious about that, rather than just shutting something down. So another thought on this is the idea of trust and control. So when we look at something like the school system, so bringing this into education, and by school system, I don't just mean school system, I also mean curriculum, and that idea of curriculum preparing you for adult life. That's a plan. It's a vision that has emerged. You can look back to where it came from, but it's a plan, and it's a path. It's one of many paths. So I think that another thing that contemplating this idea of trust can do is invite us to ask, is that plan making sense? So we're following that plan, that expectation, even whether it's at home or at school or whatever it is, we kind of, we have that notion. And asking the question of, what is that plan? Does my child think it makes sense for them, for their life? Can start to raise the questions that might allow you to say, actually, it's not making sense. Let's trust ourselves to start putting together something different. Because anytime we step aside from a plan that's widely recognized, it's like stepping into a crevasse. And so having that trust that we also have the tools to find our way through that is important. So again, going back to taking some time to think, when do I trust my child? When does my child trust me? How does that play out? Can we use that pattern that we've already got in this new situation, whatever it is? And the last point I had on this is when you're actually in a situation of a child or a teen stepping aside from something that's not, stepping into something that's an uncommon path rather than a common path. So, when our kids are really little, we are much more in that place of control, making sure that they're okay. And as I said, when they're 20, you want to be hoping that a lot of it's coming from them. So this idea of trust, I think, when we bring it into big decisions, if we think we trust them, we trust ourselves, we've got that image of the campfire, then these big decisions can be made from a place of trust in the process rather than a place of control. I give you permission to leave school, or I'm taking on responsibility for unschooling you and making sure that you're going to be okay. So that idea of, if you notice that you're starting to feel a responsibility for something, just asking yourself, does it make sense for me to have this responsibility, to be feeling that this is on me? Or would it be best for everybody for this to be in that campfire of life, for my child's life, and us to be figuring it out together so that it's either a shared decision or it can feel like their decision? I'm not sure how clearly I'm saying that, but it's because I think as our kids, this idea of trust, we talked about it a lot in terms of parental, like our trust in ourselves and them, but really we want them to trust in themselves. And the more we can relinquish that desire to control, to make sure that everything is okay, the more their trust in themselves has the opportunity to emerge. And if you just think for a moment about how mind-blowingly liberating and exciting it is to trust yourself as a kid and as a teen and as a young adult. And what I'm discovering, my daughter's just about to turn 18 and she's just gone away to school this past September. And I had so much I need to make sure you're okay, you're 2 hours away, so much of that. And as I was able to unpack that and start to feel that trust, because she was there anyway, me feeling that I had to make sure she was okay, it wasn't going to change the fact that she was 2 hours away. And stepping into that more trusting and more getting out of her space has been so exciting for our relationship, for her to feel it. And she'll laugh at herself now. And she's like, oh, I still didn't do that thing I have to do. But it's her, I can witness that shift. And it comes back to that sense of trust. So as hard as it can be to feel that, how do I trust? And starting to touch it and to notice where it's already happening, so liberating. And what an amazing gift to your kid, to yourself, and to your relationship. So I'm just going to quickly look to make sure that I at least sort of touched on everything that you mentioned. So the idea of trusting them to know what's best for them. Yeah, so I think we kind of touched on that, and we can look at that more as we get into our conversation afterwards. Yeah, and Sydney, what you had said about the people that you were talking to saying they wouldn't be on their path if their parents hadn't trusted them. I think that's what this kind of leads to. Is as parents, we so want to make sure they're okay. And we just have no idea what their path is going to be at all. And they will be on their path the more space we offer them. And that relationship of trust, when it's there, they also know that they can come to us when things are feeling like they're falling apart. If they need to crash, when they trust, when we've stepped away from judgment and control, they know that they can come because it's much easier to come to somebody who didn't already tell you you shouldn't have done that. It's such a huge thing, and that it happens with, all the teenage things that we think about, drugs and all of that kind of stuff. And it happens with things like learning and school and a job and, a friend. Like the more we can be that open, collaborative, shared firekeeping responsibility to their life rather than ensuring and taking control, the easier it is for them to come to us, I think. All right, so I'm going to leave the recording part of things there. Yeah, okay, so this will be on our YouTube channel if anybody wants to go back and watch this part again, and there's always the possibility to put comments there as well. I'm going to end the recording so that we can chat openly. Thank you everybody for joining us.